Welcome to the channel, everybody. Today we are finally taking a look at the SCALETRAINS.com SD40s. Alright, so jumping right into this, we have a lot to talk about. We have the SD40-2s as well as the single SD40-3 here in the back. And we're going to do a lot of back and forth comparisons between these and the Kato back here. So sit back, relax, and let's just get into the visuals. Okay, we are up close and personal, and by far this is my favorite unit. I love 6313. As the review progresses, I will talk to you about why I love this thing so much, but let's just go ahead and look at the details because frankly, there's nothing else on the market like these ScaleTrain units. These things are just gorgeous. Okay, so starting at the front here, this is going to be a bit of a departure from any other SD40 we've looked at. Just detail stacked on detail stacked on detail. So starting up front, these are, of course, the new microtrains light couplers from ScaleTrains. Very good usability on these. We'll talk about them a little bit later. Absolutely clip those hoses when the time comes, but all separately applied MU hoses. These are gorgeous. They're well put together. The snowplows are, bar none, some of the best I've seen on any N-scale locomotives. The decoupling levers are painted and just perfectly applied. Hyper thin handrails, decently connected, but very fragile. You do have to be careful with these. These are absolutely hobby grade units, and frankly, they do require special handling, but beauty comes a little bit of fragility, so just keep that in mind. But man, when it comes to scale, these things are as scale as they get. Special paint features front to back, painted everything that needs to be painted. The added detail on the hood, let's just adjust our focus just a little bit here. Move back into the cab. Just, although if I would not have seen the C39-8s, these probably would be the most detailed units I've seen come from ScaleTrain so far. I had nothing but glowing things to say about the Gevos. These would have been a drastic step up in quality from those, at least to my eye. I would have said they are the best out there, except I have seen the C39-8s, and boy, is that going to be a review when we get there. But just take a moment here, look at some of the molding on these things. They're great. Wearing my dust proudly on these units. They are getting used on a daily basis. It is dust season in Montana, so going to have to deal with it. The thinnest, probably best windshield wipers I've seen on a unit so far. Separately applied horn, very crisp number boards. I mean, that is super detailed at that scale. Rivets, bolts, all visible to the eye from a little bit of a distance, but very thin. I mean, look at around this door. You can see very fine detail. It is gorgeous. Moving on to the trucks, some of the best trucks I have seen on an N-scale unit so far. Get this into a nice focus here. I believe that's a grease tube. Not sure. Added detail. Love it. Separate color. Looks absolutely great. Just when I talk about the Kato SD40-2s and how slammed they are, they're super low. These things are absolutely that way. Some people have ran into issues with them being too low. I do not have grades for the most part on my layout. I have not run into that issue. I could see where it might be a problem, but I personally haven't run into that. As we move across these, we have the airlines, very fine detailing on all the bearing surfaces there. It is just a gorgeous model front to back. And we'll pull this into focus here. Chain detail right here. Some of the nicest decal work I've seen so far. And this is a patch unit, so you can see some remnants of the patches here. That makes for a nice bit of added detail. Folded in mirror, a non-functioning, unfortunately, flasher on the roof. Excellent grill work on the side. Custom paint, you can see it looks like it's kind of chipped away. This is a special model with the smaller fuel tank than the other SD40s. Initially, I did not like the look of this. I thought it just seemed funny. But as I grew to really like the performance of this model, the kind of different look of it has grown on me. It's just different in every way, and it makes it a special unit for me. Up here on our radiator grills, this is actually the dynamics, but you can see separately applied fans in there. Best in the industry. You will not see fans better than that anywhere else. These are by far the best. When it comes to the door panels on the side, very fine detail, good thick body panels, and you can individually see every door, every hinge, every latch. Excellent. Love to see all of that. Painted fuel cap, all that stuff. Love to see it. The different style radiator grills right here for these type of units. This is a little bit different generation. Custom paint. The one thing I wish they would have painted the copper brass pickups. What are these? I believe these are just straight copper. For the wheel sets, they do stand out a little bit. Wish they would have painted the backside of those. Is what it is. If you were a modeler, you could do that. And then we have as we come around to the rear of this here, we have a rear snowplow, which is awesome. Extra added detail. Again, number boards, super fine. Very bright when on a powered layout. Front and rear LEDs, I do like them. Added detail up here, handrail, steps, all of those are separately applied. Color matching paint, love all of that. Again, painted handrails and steps, just beautiful front to back. So let's jump into the Union Pacific model. I have less to say, but we'll just kind of look at some of the standout features on this. Again, front end, beautiful. The paint work for this Union Pacific really brings out a lot of the added detail. No painted handrail and steps, as would be prototypical for the time period, but all the added detail on this thing really make it stand out. Look up front here where we have these access panels. The level of line detail you get on that without a wash is just next level. And the decal work on this is substantially nicer than that ex-Milwaukee unit, just because this is, not a repaint or patch job. There's a lot of good decal work on this. Everything holds true on this as the other one. Window shades, like to see that. That's awesome. But something about this is on these Union Pacific units with these, the silver painted trucks. I love this. The stupid resin color stuff is out, and we have actual painted trucks on these, and they look fantastic. And you can really see the detail on these. And if you did a bit of a wash, these things would absolutely pop. But look at the bearing detail down here by where the grease hose or whatever that is. You can see the airlines, chains, all of the little added detail in here. These things are just the best trucks you'll see on an SD40. And moving down here, just gorgeous paint on this. Color match exactly the way it needs to be. I love the way this yellow looks. Just front to back, a beautiful unit. And again, on this, best in the business radiator fans. Those things are just absolutely gorgeous. All right, and let's jump to the SD40-3. This one is a bit of a bummer, I have to say. I really wish this one would have ran better. It is such a cool looking unit, and it's such a talking piece. These rebuilt cabs on these are very interesting. I don't know if I like the look, but they're starting to grow on me. But they definitely make, when you're trying to build out interesting consists, this is one of the ways you can do it, is interesting looking engines, and this is definitely one of them. Front and rear functioning ditch lights, which is nice. I love that. Realize the other two, it's not prototypical, but very, very scale on these. Also, relatively even. There are some other units out there where the right and left ditch lights are not particularly even. And when you have units like CSX or NS where you have alternating ditch lights, getting the luminance levels matched and having those lights flash the same way can be very difficult. But up front, again, a whole bunch of detail. Wonderful snowplow, MU hoses, all the great stuff. Painted handrails, throw disconnect lever, all that stuff. Notice right here, a little painted area around the lights. That's awesome. And when it comes to fine detail on the number boards, look at those. I mean, just super crisp. Lots of added detail on the roof area on this. Look at the louver work on this. Just chef's kiss when it comes to body detail on these. And this is not the model to show it, but they do all have sanding hoses. That's cool. Probably makes them a little difficult to get into. I bought all of these with sound. I did not add DC to them, or DCC to them, excuse me. Paint on this thing is excellent. I was not a fan of the Y3 or YN3, whatever this is, dark future, what have you, paint scheme, but it is definitely growing on me. And man, this is one of the units that would bring me to do it. It is just so nicely put together front to back. All the added detail. Special thing here, I believe this is the remote for yard work on this. That is just like an added specialty feature on this that really, again, makes this a talking piece. I just wish it ran better. So, man, awesome units. Just nailing the visual quality on these. All right, with that, we will jump in and start talking about the usability and runability of these. Hopefully, you guys found the visuals on these to be very appealing because honestly, they are the best in the industry. But the SD40-2 market is very, very wide at this point. We have offerings from Kato, SCALETRAINS, Broadway Limited, as well as Intermountain. So when you're entering this market space, you really got to be bringing something special. And on the visual side, we definitely are. But the electronic side, I don't know if we're quite there yet. So let's jump into this a little bit. So Katos are obviously the cheapest on the market. You can get into an SD40-2 for about $90. These were all ordered with sound. So you can either get them DC or DCC with sound. There's no intermediate option of just straight DC. So keep that in mind. The breakdown of these could probably be as difficult as, say, the GP30. So that's something to think about if you're not really into doing DCC installs. Just opt for the sound units. You probably will be happier, but let's definitely listen to what I have to say here because there are some things you need to know. But if you're going to do the same thing with a Kato, you're looking at about a $200 to $210 engine. So you're installing your own lock sound, doing your own sound file, as well as wiring in your own speaker. A little bit of extra work, but there's a $50 to $60 difference in price point there. And that's a big dollar figure for just some added detail. So at least for me, I think we should be getting a little better runability out of these than what I'm seeing. But maybe the detail is enough to sway most people. Now, when we're talking Intermountain, unfortunately, they just don't hold a candle to these newer units. They're using outdated truck systems. They got the monster truck effect going on. The body detail is okay. It's definitely a little better than a Kato, but the subframe just isn't as nice. And frankly, they look more like toys than they do hobby engines. And when we're talking Broadway Limited, although I did have issues with my Paragon 4 versions, I really, looking back, think that was more of a DCC control system than those boards failing. So with that said, there are stealth versions that are going to be coming with the next run. And that is an interesting price point. You could be putting a lock sound into that, and you could be in a similar price area as these right here. You could have that that drivetrain that I thought was very good inside of the SD40-2s, along with the lock sound instead of the Paragon 4, and we might be talking a real competitor to these for a slightly cheaper price. So we'll see where that comes in, but just keep in mind that the market is very saturated with SD40-2s, so price is going to be a big consideration as we delve into the electronics. So as I said, all of these are lock sound units. 6313 was the first one that I got, and out of the box, it just didn't run at slow speed. It had decent marginal speed, 20 to 30 scale mile per hour, seemed to work really good, has an excellently quiet drivetrain, as well as 8080 is the same way, and 4012. Drivetrains are absolutely silent up to speed. That is a must when you're asking this kind of price point. I think that that is a thing that every manufacturer needs to take to heart, is silent drivetrains up to, at least in my opinion, 50 scale miles per hour, and these achieve that. However, the slow speed performance just is not there. It took me a hot minute to figure out what was wrong with these things. I had to spend a lot of time on the internet trying to come up with a way to make these runs. So this 6313 was bought to work with an Atlas GP40, the BN unit that you see this with in all of my videos, and it simply couldn't keep up. It was jittery, it would stall often, and it just was not reliable. I came across these settings on a YouTube video, and I showed you these in my GP30 review. They did help clean up those units, but these are an absolute necessity for these units with the factory sound files. And so after I installed those settings, I really grew to love 6313. It's a beautiful model, and now it really does run great. And it's got a very quiet drivetrain. So everything that I want in an engine, it has. And it is now one of my favorite units that I have. I honestly really want its sister units so I could put together some really cool consists, but just don't quite have the cash for it, to be honest with you. 8080 was picked up with 4012 a little bit later. Kind of want to jump back into the review game to kind of get a few more units into my roster just to get a feel for the actual quality. I usually don't like to do a test case of one. I like to pick up units from different places to get different runs, that type of thing, just to kind of see how things are progressing. And 8080, for the most part, holds up to the same standards as 6313. Yes, out of the box, you absolutely have to put in those secondary back BMF settings. Once you do so, it does turn into a pretty darn good slow speed performer. This doesn't quite have the break-in time that, say, 6313 does. I'm probably at 60 or so hours of testing time on it. 6313 is countless at this point. I couldn't tell you how many hours I have that thing running. So it might need just a little bit more break-in time, but for the most part, it is very reliable. I did determine that there are a couple of situations where, although completely in spec by NMRA standards, it can kind of end up stalling itself out. And that comes down to, I was doing a bunch of testing with my GP30s, trying to figure out what was wrong with them. And I have a specific spot on my layout where I have a curve, a super elevated curve that's at a bit of a slight angle. And if you are going very slow, gravity can kind of pull the unit to the inside of the rails. And in that specific spot, if I'm moving very slowly, I can actually get it to stall itself out. And it seems like the tolerance stacking between the wheel set, the copper pickups, and the edge of the trucks is just enough under certain circumstances that it can actually disconnect from a set of the brass pickups from the wheel sets, or copper pickups, whatever they happen to be. And I think that's actually what the problem is with some of my less reliable GP30s. I only ran into that in that very specific location on my layout, running at very slow speeds. I tested it with 6313, and it can make it through there. So I'm wondering if it's just a tolerance stacking issue that I'm running into. Otherwise, most of the time, 8080 is absolutely reliable. Now, 4012 is a different animal. So being an SD40-3, I expected it to have a slightly different sound, and the sound files that I've heard for it have a different startup sequence. And from the factory, it just didn't sound right. It had kind of the SD40-2, uh, turbo whistle, but it just didn't sound right to me. I couldn't really place it. But man, did it run horribly. Terrible slow speed control, terrible mid speed control. It was just all over the place. And so I went ahead and installed the back EMF settings that I found on that video. And at slow speeds, it would crawl momentarily and then jerk forward 2 or 3 inches. And so I was just like, whoa, this can't be at all correct. There must be an issue with the sound file. So I went on the website and I could not find a sound file that was directly attached to the run of these SD40-3s. So I reached out to the community and I'm like, hey, if anybody out there has a working SD40-3 similar to this one that would be willing to send me their CV list, I'd like to copy it just to see if there's something up with my sound file or if there's just some bad CVs on this. And I had a friend reach out to me. He sent me the god-awful long list of CVs, and I meticulously typed every one of his settings into this unit by hand through my lock programmer, and it still ran like garbage. So at this point, I reached out to SCALETRAINS, and I said, hey, can I get the proper factory sound file for this so I can get a review done? They emailed me back, and this is what I received. This is an SD38 sound file. And I was kind of flabbergasted. I did not think that was the case. So I went ahead and I flashed it onto this unit. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's an SD38 sound file. So this is a, non-turbocharged unit that, has kind of that diesel knock. There's no turbo whine. And obviously, none of the function settings were correct. So I was just kind of floored that they would send me the wrong sound file for a premium product. So I went ahead and got on the ESU website, found an SD40-3 sound file, flashed it, again had issues. I found another SD40-3 sound file of kind of a different variant, and that's what I currently have on there now. Now, obviously, none of the functions were correct, so it takes a hot minute to function map front and rear ditch lights, get all that stuff properly configured, do all this stuff. And at this point, I'm 20 hours of dinking around on a brand new locomotive trying to get it to just run. And I did, for the most part, get this thing working. It still doesn't have the best slow speed control. And with these non-factory sound files, the back EMF settings that I came up with on this video, they absolutely do not work. You need to do a little separate tuning. And so I thought, man, maybe there is an issue with running these non-factory sound files. I wonder if 6313, a known good working unit, would work decent with a different sound file. And so I kind of had this idea, maybe I will do a bit of a custom job with my GP40 and my SD40 pair. And I'm going to do something that I know a local set of engines around here had done. They had the turbochargers removed because they're doing switching work, and they're back to just superchargers, or I think they're called roots blowers. Much more like a GP38 type sound. And so I went ahead and found an SD38 sound file and installed it on this, so it would have a a roots blown type prime mover. And as you heard in the pre-review run, it sounds fantastic. And I think it's a really cool model now. It's got something that's really interesting about it. And my GP40 is the same way. It's set up like a GP38, custom sound file, ran great with just a bone stock sound file. Same thing with 6313. I installed the sound file, did a little bit of tuning, used the exact same speed match settings that I had, and rock and roll, we're up and running. Excellent slow speed performance, wonderful locomotive. Love 6313 even more now that it's a little bit custom. So what this means is the SD40-3 needs to go back for repair. And that's a problem because I currently have 3 locomotives back at SCALETRAINS right now getting repaired under warranty. And it's been, I think, 80 days at this point since they received them, not since I started it. They were supposed to be back within 60 days, which at that point, 60 days is way too much time to be waiting on warranty locomotives. That's ridiculous. So I couldn't send this back to have warranty work done until I had my review done. And SCALETRAINS, if you're going to be selling premium products, you need to be providing premium service. And 60 days for a warranty repair is just not acceptable. And so I still have GP30s to go back, and I still have this SD40-3 to go back. The other thing is I put in service requests on these so I could get the process started as soon as I finished my review, and there was no offer to have them pay freight to get them back to them. This is another problem. If you are not going to provide quality products, especially for the price point that these come in at, you need to be paying for the freight. Broadway Limited, whenever I had an issue, they would send me a return label so I could send it back to them and get them repaired. That's the way it needs to be. Atlas is changing my mind about their service department. I've had some issues, and every time I've reached out to their service department, they've been excellent. I had an issue with an engine recently that was just odd. I can't really go into it till the review, but it was odd. First thing they did was send me a return label. They were super good and knowledgeable when I talked to them. And frankly, I've basically had no contact from SCALETRAINS since setting up a warranty request on these. And that is frustrating to me. One, I'm not taking these back to a local dealer because I had to purchase these online. I live in a rural location. And so I have to have them shipped to me at my cost, only to have them not function properly, where I have to then pay to ship them back to the manufacturer to get repaired. That's just not acceptable. So with that said, I do not think that this is a ESU problem. I think that the boards on these are working as they properly should. This has something to do with the hardware. I don't know if it's motors. I don't know if it's the interface board. But to me, I think 40-12 has a problem with the onboard electronics and not the decoders. So that's important. This is not a lock sound problem. This is definitely a SCALETRAIN problem, in my opinion. So let's now talk about the runnability and usability of these units. So being SD40-2s, there's going to be a bit of difficulty with these. So I guess I want to kind of separate 40-12 at this point and just kind of set it to the side and know that we just have an engine that doesn't function properly. Let's just look at 8080 and 6313 because this is actually going to make the review a little bit easier. So 1 out of 3 needs to go back for repair, but the other 2 are actually pretty good. And so that's important. The one thing that I have to say is the major downside of these is their pulling power. And the reason for that is, one, the GP40 Atlases can outpull these, but GP units, at least to me, are meant to be like road switchers. And so they're not doing heavy freight. You know, for the most part, you're going to see them working in yards, maybe a couple of them lashed up in a, you know, like a high-speed priority, like Santa Fe type thing in the mid-90s. That's kind of what I would do with those. But SD40s are in a different realm. They've been used as like class 1 main power for engines or main power for trains for a long time. You could see 4 or 5 of these lashed up pulling big old coal trains, that type of stuff. They eventually work into yard service. I mean, if there's been a job, an SD40-2 has been doing it. So these have to be very versatile engines. So that pulling power is kind of, unfortunately, subpar. Katos are actually pretty good. So realistically, you could maybe lash these up with some other engines that did a little bit better and kind of use these as sound for the totality of your lash up. So that's kind of an option. Also, LEDs on these are very, very good. Very bright for for lock sound units, not like a TCS, but very good for what they are. And frankly, I really like the lighting controls that you get on these lock sound boards. I have a whole video about how I control that. These are set up that way, and I do love them for that. They make them great lighting setup for switchers or road units. And as road units, short of their lack of pulling power, they are just amazing. Being able to get up to full speed and have an absolutely silent drivetrain is excellent. That is so nice. Not that I have high priority trains on my layout often, but if you do want to be running something a little bit faster, 40, 50 scale miles per hour, having that motor buzz in the background, especially if you just kind of have them running in the background, it can get a little annoying when you're trying to enjoy a video game or read a book or do what you want to do and just have these running in the background. These you can have up to speed and just not have them bother you, and that's a big plus for these. And if I'm going to give ScaleTrains thumbs up on anything, that is one of those things. That is just the visuals and the silent drivetrain. Awesome. I love that. The other thing is as we move these into the switcher role, they are 6-axle locomotives, which means running through switches is generally pretty easy. I tried these on a couple of my number 4 turnouts, my crossovers, I guess I should say, on my kind of modular secondary switching layout that I have set up, and they were very good. 6313 absolutely decimates them. It doesn't even hiccup going through them. 8080 occasionally will have a light stall, but in consist, it just kind of picks itself back up. All Kato number 6s, they're perfectly reliable, and as slow as you want to go, they'll roll through them, and that's how a 6-axle locomotive should be. They are built and function the way 6-axle locomotives should. The slow speed control is slightly less refined as an Atlas unit, but it's good enough for the average user. Unless you're trying to do really super scale, slowly roll in and couple, they're not going to quite do that. The GP40s from Atlas will, and some of these other models I got coming up will do it as well. But we're darn close. And for the price point these are at, I think the reliable units are so far holding up to what I think they should be able to do. The other thing about these is factory microtrains light couplers. Again, just like the GP30s, go ahead and get rid of these hoses. After that, I actually find these to be probably the best ones so far from ScaleTrains. Moving in and coupling and decoupling, they definitely work better than the standard ScaleTrains coupler, and compared to the GP30s, I don't know if the geometry on these is just a little bit different, but they like to couple in more scenarios, and that's a big plus. Again, as switcher units, coupling and decoupling is very important, and so where these have a very mixed role on any layout and have to be able to be used in every situation, so far, I have to say that these are really becoming the premier SD40. Now, again, 4012, none of this holds true for. Short of maybe the coupling and decoupling, but it doesn't work through turnouts. It's just not reliable. It doesn't have good slow speed control. I'm going to chalk this up to it just needs to be worked out on the warranty side. So we're kind of just, again, we're just going to focus on these two up front here. And when it comes to runnability, coupled with the lock sound boards, I think these have capabilities above and beyond any other SD40-2 on the market right now. Short of a little bit of pulling power, they are lacking in that department. But other than that, they can't be beat. They're strictly just the best running units out there right now. So now is the part that I'm going to struggle with the most. What would I recommend someone do if they were looking to get into an SD40-2? So I think the DC option for these is overpriced compared to the DC option like Kato or potentially the Broadway Limited DC units. And that strictly comes down to, I don't think you're getting the best bang for your buck, because in the DC price point, we're going for cheap. And I don't think these quite slip into a good position for that. Now, when it comes to sound units, this is where things start to change, because when you I don't think Broadway has a good enough unit out there right now to compete with these. Not yet. The newest run might change my mind. I don't think Intermountain even comes close to holding a candle to these. So that just leaves a Kato with a lock sound install versus these. And so a lot of people wouldn't necessarily have the ability to do their own lock sound install. So you might be paying a bit of a premium for a Kato with one. And if that's the case, you are getting very close, if not exceeding the price of these units. And at that point, it's not even close. You just need to go ahead and get yourself a SCALETRAINS unit. Hope it's not one that you need to send back from warranty, because that is going to be the kicker. If you end up with something that doesn't run quite good enough, the warranty system is going to be the downfall. So I think the price to performance shift that you get when you move into these sound units is potentially worth the wait. Once you get a unit that runs as good as this one, or close this one, I think in the long run, if you had that next to a Kato with the lock sound install, just because of the visual upgrades, and frankly, they're a little bit better through turnouts than a Kato, and that's difficult, but I would be willing to say I have less derailments with these, especially pulling rolling stock, and maybe that has something to do with the couplers on these being factory. And not that I have a lot of derailments with these units, but certain rolling stock just don't like to work behind them, and I haven't had that issue with these SCALETRAINS units. So I would probably push people to get these over a sound installed Kato. And I did forget to mention this earlier. Coming up with a well-tuned speaker for the Kato without doing milling and getting a decent amount of volume as well as that low-end rumble, I think would be rather difficult. These units from the factory are very well tuned when it comes to sound. They're very loud. I hope you can get that on the pre-run review, or pre-review run, excuse me. I'm going to try to push everybody who's looking for sound information to those. I've done a really good job on standardizing the music level in that. So from at least a couple videos ago till now, I set a static level for my music. And then the louder the locomotive sounds compared to that is the real life difference that you would hear. So if you were ever curious, just if you can barely hear the locomotive over the music, then it's relatively quiet. If you can really hear the locomotive over the music, you can tell that that has a really good sound performance. And one thing about the sound files, these good usable ones, if you're not quite into what comes factory, I installed a completely separate sound file into this, was able to use all of the same factory settings except for those back EMF settings, but all of my speed matching settings, and it just works. And one thing about lock sound stuff, I'll say it over and over again, horn selections are just getting so good. You can jump to multiple different styles of horns, and there's no like repeat sound that you can hear. They're just smooth and crisp, and have a good decay to them, and that's awesome. They really sound good. The prime movers are really coming a long way in N scale. You're starting to get a little better low end performance, and that's really adding some realism. So frankly, these really well tuned sound systems, I'm getting darn good slow speed performance once I've got some of the issues worked out. I think these just straight up outperform the Katos and everything else on the market. So I think sound is the way to go. And I really hope that you end up with good units. And honestly, I hope that ScaleTrains kind of gets their act together. And if we're having issues with some of these, like 4012, we can get some turnaround times that are a little bit faster. Because frankly, there's nothing else out there like these. I would recommend these to anyone as long as they didn't need them to work tomorrow, because it kind of goes back to some of my Broadway stuff. I loved getting from their outlet store, but you bought there knowing that you're probably going to run into a problem. So just expect to have a little bit of downtime. And that's kind of the same way I'm coming from these. The value on them is so good, it's worth it knowing that you're potentially going to have some downtime. So man, this review would change drastically. This would become a no-brainer if they got their warranty situation figured out. But until then, pretty darn good, and I'll continue to recommend them. So at least for now, thumbs up on these. Go ahead and get them. I do really enjoy them, and 6313 is by far one of my favorite engines. It's just a talking piece that I love to have out on my layout all the time. And anybody who comes over and watches it run with this custom sound file, they just love it. And so I hope that anyone else getting these can enjoy them as much as I do too, because they are some of my favorites on my layout. So with that said, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of your week. Bye now.